Welcome back to another episode of Ballroom Chat. I'm your host, Samantha with Love.Live.Dance. Today, I'm going to be talking with Aaron Pierce. He is a former two-time U.S. National Amateur Rhythm Champion, a former member of the Utah Valley University Tour Team, and he's currently a Professional Rhythm Finalist. Before we jump into our conversation, if you have not already done so, please do hit the subscribe button and also turn on the bell for notifications every single time we post. So without further ado, let's talk with Aaron about his competitive career and also his teaching experiences. Well, thank you, Aaron, so much for being a guest on today's episode.
Thank you, Samantha. Happy to be here.
So how is life treating you? How are you adjusting to the craziness that is 2020?
So far, it's been good. I know it's been difficult and trying for like many people in many different ways, right? Everyone's had a different experience, but I think we've made the best of it during this time with teaching online classes and things like that. But I've been loving California and like the heat and the sun. So at least that's been a positive influence, but everything's been great.
Awesome. Have you had a lot of success with getting your students to go ahead and continue with Zoom lessons while the studio was closed? I know my students, they want that physical connection. They were like, we'll hold off and wait until we can actually see you in person.
Yes, I definitely had the same reaction from some students as you did. People miss the social aspect, but a lot of the students still continued with Zoom. And I think they realized that at first they were apprehensive, they're like, I'm so used to having my partner there to help me through the steps. But in actuality, now that they've, been back to the studio, they realize I know my steps better. I'm more balanced because they had to practice on their own for so many months. It was about 4 months. So I think they've actually realized that was a really, really good influence on their dancing, which was nice.
Awesome. So in the introduction, I mentioned obviously that you were a member of the UVU Tour Team and then went on to great success as an amateur champion and now as a professional Rising Star finalist. How did all of this start for you? How did you get into ballroom dance?
Okay, that's a longer story, right? So that's a good one. So I was originally theater, right? So theater was always my go-to for the longest time. So I started off with dance with like tap, ballet, and jazz. And you would do partner dancing, in some shows, but it wasn't the main focus. I grew up in New Jersey, which people hear in New Jersey and they think, oh, big hub of ballroom, right? But I grew up in the south part of New Jersey where ballroom was basically obsolete. But that still didn't deter me, there was some studios about an hour away from where I was. And once I got more and more into the dance for the theater, I realized I enjoyed the partnering side, sometimes more just than a solo. So I started taking ballroom classes when I was around 14 or 15. So a little later than I think most people, but that was okay. So I started off with classes in New Jersey and quickly then got into the teaching franchise world at Arthur Murray in New Jersey. But at the same time, I was going to school to be an art teacher, which, resulted in getting a degree in art history. But because of my education, I was also looking for a place that I could get my degree in art or art history and focus on ballroom dancing a little bit more. I realized that's where I really wanted to go with it. And I was like, I wish there was a place that had both, right? Because where I was in New Jersey, I'm like, I don't know of any places. So I just did a lot of research, I would say, in my sophomore year of college. And that's when I found out about Utah and this mecca of ballroom and college ballroom, collegiate ballroom. But so my second year I applied and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go out to Utah. I want to join their tour team. So I did the whole process of, auditioning and things like that and moved out to Utah in 2013 to be a part of their tour team. So that was kind of, before then, I wasn't really a big competitive ballroom dancer. I did a lot of social dancing. I was learning and then teaching, but I wasn't really in the competition scene yet. But then coming to Utah, it was this flood of information, right? As you live in Utah, like it's its own community of ballroom competitions, coaches, like, and of course it's connected to the larger community, but it's this really great place to learn. So I learned a lot during my time at Utah Valley University, right? It's like that's how I started it, right?
Mhm.
Maybe this is going into later.
Go for
But
it.
yeah, I'm trying to just maybe set the timeline, then you can ask whatever you like. But so I was at Utah Valley University for 4.5 years and a part of their tour team, which, I was able to go to China with them and Blackpool. And I did the Latin and standard team, but mostly during that time, not only was I learning different styles but I was improving. That's when I finally started to cultivate like the competition side, I would have to say, like, and from that point on, it's been competitive dancing, right? And I never thought that's where I would be, coming from theater and ballet and jazz. And often I miss my tap dancing, but it's been a great process going from being an amateur in Utah to then moving to professional, still in Utah, now being professional rhythm out in California, right? So that was kind of the linear progression from ballet to to where I am now.
That's awesome. So I have to say, just as a quick aside, when I first moved to Utah, you were like a grounding force for me at the studio. I don't think you realized that, but you were like the only other East Coast person that was now living in Utah. And I felt like we had so many conversations of like, this is a little bit weird, right? Like, this is different. Like, it's not just me, right?
I remember that. Yes. Well, I'm glad. I didn't know I was a grounding force. That's good. That's good to know.
Sure.
But I agree. You start to question, like, Utah was a great place. I loved my like 5 years there, but you do question all the time. If you're an outsider per se coming in, you're like, am I normal? Or this, because just the culture is so different of everything, and especially I think versus the East Coast. Every coast is different, but the East Coast has this very like, I'm going to tell you how it is. This is it, and not necessarily in a rude way, right? It's
Right.
just very informative. And in Utah, you're just confronted with this extreme friendliness, right? Like
Yes.
people want to know you right away. I remember before joining the team, it was like I found out I was going to be moving in April, and I had to move in July. And like right before I moved, I'm getting all these messages from the tour team members like, can't wait to meet you. I'm so excited to know you. And I'm like, what do these people want? They don't even know me.
Yes. Yes. It's immediate suspicion and distrust from an East Coast mindset, because we're like, we don't make eye contact when we're walking down the street. You got to get somewhere. You're going to say what you need to do, and then you're going to move on with your day. Whereas in Utah, it's like, how are you? How are the kids? What did you have for breakfast? It's all encompassing, and it's very disconcerting the first couple of months that you're out here.
You really don't trust at first. Like, not because you don't want to, it's just like, you're so friendly to me, and like, I could be a terrible person, and you don't know that. And they see through it. They're like, no, you're a good person. I'm like, okay. But you just used to building a relationship, knowing someone first, right?
Yep.
Coming from the East Coast. But definitely different, but interesting, right?
Yeah.
To say the least.
So with that, when you switched your sophomore year from going to school on the East Coast to now being on the tour team, switching to UVU, what was your first impression of the tour team itself? With theater, had you been part of kind of that group performance troupe atmosphere, or was this the first experience of something along those lines?
With theater, I mostly performed with this one regional/community theater in New Jersey, and so I was used to a sense of community, like they were family. But as I went into college, things changed quickly, right? I was more focused on not just studies, but I was starting to teach ballroom, and that really limited also my time to go do theater. So I was kind of slowly disconnecting from that theater community, but I was also on a modern company at the university. So I had gone into modern dance, and I was really on the modern company for 2 years. In the university was Rowan, and so I was still used to being a part of a team, right? It had always been, you're a part of a company, you're part of a team. So that aspect of it wasn't, I was used to that, right? And I was looking forward to that. I don't think if I would have had that coming to Utah, I don't know if my experience would have been as good as it was. I'm really grateful that I came and I had a group of people that you kind of had to be around and you really got to know and like. If not, you would have been, I think I would have been so isolated, right? My first year there. So that aspect of it was actually really great, coming onto a team. But it was, I would say it's probably the most intimidating experience I've had of going onto a team, because it was not only a different community and state, but so it's like, yes, you're dealing with a culture that you don't necessarily know, but also ballroom was still newer, I think, for me, in that sense of, I was like used to my jazz crowd or modern crowd, and I know dancers are dancers, but people do act differently within each sector of dance. So I think it was also this intimidation of, how are they going to be, and are they going to treat me like, what do you know? And I remember when they decided to put me on the tour team, they're like, okay, we're going to send you all these videos. You need to know your routines before you come. And I was like, huh, what? It's that immediate fear of like, I have to learn like 6 or 7 minimum routines from a video, and I have no partner to practice with. And if I'm being completely honest, a lot of the stuff was international style, and my experience was American style, right? Which so many people are like, they're the opposite, right? They know international, either standard or Latin, and then rhythm is something, or smooth is something that they learn later. But no, I was opposite. I was American all the way. And then they're like, you need to learn this international dance. And I'm like, okay, I can do this, but it was like pressure after pressure, right?
Yeah.
But I like a good challenge. So I think that was the scariest part, was coming into this team. And I showed up a week late because I was working and I wanted to finish an event at my job before moving. But I'm like, I knew all these people already knew the routines. They had either been a part of the tour team before, they either compete Latin or standard. So I'm like, I'm really going to be an underdog here. So it was, which I think that's grounding and humbling, and you need to do that. But at the same time, like, they're going to be like, who do we pick? Right.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the reality. Like, coming into it, everyone was very nice and welcoming. And everyone, I think, felt the same pressure of, I have to learn all these routines from a video before joining. So I wasn't the only one freaking out, which was a good thing.
Yeah. I feel like, and you can tell me if you would agree with this or disagree with this. I feel like there's always a little bit of a sense of imposter syndrome in this industry. Like, I feel like until you reach a certain level, and maybe even the top teachers and the top professionals still have this, but it's like you look around occasionally and you're like, I don't belong. There's no way that I've made it into this room. There's no way that they accepted my audition tape and now I've got to learn 6 routines on the spot. Someone is going to realize that I'm not as good as they think I am, right?
Yes. No, I think that you like nailed it, like right on the head. Like you're like, okay, I got this opportunity. They gave me a shot, but you're just waiting for like the floor to drop out. Like, when are they going to realize that, like, maybe I'm not prepared for this? But I think a lot of people in this industry realize potential more, right? Like, they look for that, and understand that I can teach you, you will learn. And that's part of the growth process, especially being a university, right? But as a whole, like, it's also, I think it's like the system is set up for growth, right? If you look at the entire ballroom industry, it's like, it's not like we're just throwing you out into open pro division right away. It's like, no, do your amateur, and then there's even sectors within amateur, and then go to Rising Star and then work, like at least they try to give everyone an opportunity to be seen within a crowd that you don't have to be an imposter. right.
Yeah.
But there is that sense of you have to kind of act like you belong somewhere, which I have to say for me is probably one of the hardest things, because you can see it all over my face. I'm very like, I am who I am. I'm here and I'm happy to be here, but I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. But
so, obviously you survive the first couple weeks and months of being on the tour team. You learn your routines. You've been to Blackpool, China. Where else on the tour?
So the tour team, yeah, my first year, so I moved there in July, and then that September we went to China for the International Folk Art Festival. So there were 13 countries that they brought to this festival, and we were touring like just various parts of China for about 2 weeks. So that was the first tour, and that was immediate, right? That was right away. Which was a good way to start, like start it with a bang, go into it, you can do this. Then the following year, we actually returned to China, not for the same festival, but we went to different parts of China, which was nice. And then the following year, we went to Blackpool, which is when we competed in both standard and Latin medleys. And then after that, I had one more year on the tour team, and we went to, where did we go? Actually, I graduated, but then I joined them later on just to see like where they were going, and they went to California. So we performed at Disney.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the last one. Mm-hmm.
And then from a competitive perspective, obviously BYU Nationals, I'm assuming you've competed at. USDC as well. Is that where the titles are from, or was it BYU?
So BYU, yeah. So all the amateur titles were at BYU. So that's when we won National Amateur Rhythm, like 2014 and 2015. So when I first moved to Utah, it's like my dance partner was on the tour team, and so we decided to dance together, got along really well, and someone had said, they're bringing back rhythm to nationals, because I guess it had this like little hiatus, so it wasn't there for a little while. Right. I think rhythm has like a love-loss relationship in Utah sometimes, but it's stronger. And I'm excited to see that it's growing and building, and I want it to keep growing and building, because it is important, and there needs to be a stronger amateur community to keep fueling also the pro community. But yeah, someone said, they're bringing it back this year. And that's the first time I had heard of nationals, again, growing up in little country town in New Jersey. So that was that. We were like, okay, we're going to do it. Like, yeah, we'll get our 5 dances together and we'll do it. So yes, that was BYU Nationals 2014, 2015 was the US National Amateur Rhythm. And then when I was just recently, this past year, was USDC. That was my first USDC. And my dance partner, she had done USDC, I think 2 years prior as well. But this was our first one together, and that's when we made the final of Rising Star Rhythm.
Yeah, and that
was exciting.
Yeah, that's kind of unheard of for like first year new professional partnership, like debut. Oh, you're in the finals, and you were consistently in the finals. I was watching the posts come through, and it was like you were on that top 6 pretty much every competition you went to this year, right?
Yeah, that it was a whirlwind, but yeah, that is pretty much, we started in that January of last year. That year. It seems so long ago. That year. This is what 2020 does. Time has no frame anymore. But we only started, we met in November of the year prior. We started getting routines in December. And then that January, we did our first competition. It was a Fred Astaire competition that's run by Tomas and Isabella Lewandowski. And then we just went for it from there, and we were doing really good. Like it was surprising but humbling. At the same time, it's that same feeling of what's going on. You want to enjoy it, but at the same time, you're like, okay, let's not take this for granted. Let's use this opportunity to start to get known and and build a future, right? But yeah, that I think the most difficult part is, and maybe some people don't know this, is like we don't live in the same state, right? So we're also a long distance partnership, right? And we've been a long distance partnership the whole time. And I think that was the biggest challenge of, okay, how are we going to schedule this that we can see each other and practice and get ready? And that's where a lot of people were like, well, we're surprised you've gotten the results you have with the long distance and being a new partnership. But I think the biggest thing is that we just had a really good team behind us, you know, like really, really great coaches with Tomas and Isa. And I don't know. You never know. And I try not to like analyze it too much because it's like everything happens at the right time at the right place. But I do have to say, I think without the team we had, we probably wouldn't have been as successful, right? Like we had a really good direction. And of course, we're both very driven. Yeah, I think you have to be if you're going to be a long distance partnership. You can't just say, oh, we'll practice when we can. No, you have to really be on top of it. And she mostly travels here so we can do coaching. But when she's here, it's you know, very intense practices for long hours, which every competitor I think gets. But it was a whirlwind. Before nationals, usually what we would do is she comes like maybe a few weeks a month, right? But before nationals, like she had been gone to Russia for about a month, right? The summer before nationals, which, you know, at first we're like, is that a good idea? But she needed to go to Russia to see family, and that made sense. But then she came back, and we had a month and a half of she came and lived in Southern California. We practiced every day. So we were like, we're getting ready for this event. And then it was very surprising. And people told us like, you know, like this isn't something you should take lightly. And we don't.
Yeah.
But it was a surprise. That's all I can say. It was a surprise.
That's crazy to me. Just the idea of being in two separate states and then coming back and just like pounding through, like, let's practice. And then I'm not going to see you for a week or 2 weeks and then come together and practice. Do you set the routines when you're in the same space and then just essentially go on your own and practice individually when you're apart? Or do you send choreography back and forth and like make tweaks when you're in your separate home studios?
We mostly set choreography when she was here in California. So like Tomas and Isa would work with us, and then sometimes guest coaches, and we would just set the choreography, get as much information as we could. And then we kind of would have like homework to do on our own that we could like do drills for footwork or running routines. We didn't usually tweak choreography. So sometimes if I worked with them individually and we tweaked something, I'd like take a video and send it to her. I'd be like, this is the new change, okay? Because it'd be like, okay, you're here. And then in 2 weeks, we have another event. So we would try not to change too many things before. But if we did, just send a video and then she'd be here. We have a few days to just make sure it's really well rehearsed and then go to the competition. So it was, kind of like you just got to go with the roll with the punches. But we usually try to set it before. But what I have to say about like this time period, you know, during quarantine, Zoom became, you know, this great aspect and great tool for every studio and every teacher. But as a competitor, and for us, I don't know why we didn't think of using this before, right? As a way of practice. It's been here all the time, you know, especially since we don't live together. But we started using Zoom as a way of, let's run through our routines. Let's talk about dynamics here. Like, what dynamic do we want during this step? Because it's like, okay, we're not going to see each other for an even longer period of time than we're used to. So it's like, we got to use Zoom. So then Zoom did become a part of practice. And now I feel like it will always remain a part. Why not? Like, if she's gone for 2 weeks, why not meet through Zoom to practice? Of course, nothing can beat like the real human connection, but there's still so much information that we can go over together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and if nothing else, it lends you a little bit of accountability, right? Because you can't not practice if you know you have a Zoom call coming up the end of the week and you're going to run through everything together. That kind of puts you on the clock to make sure that you set that time aside to actually run through the drills or the work that you need to have ready before you meet back up. So I think that's a smart call. Something that I talked with Kimberly Mitchell about was kind of creating spontaneity in a performance. So making sure that all of the winks and all of the points and all of the head nods and all of like the cheeky little moments aren't the same every single time you run the routine. Do you think that having that performance background in theater has allowed you to perform in a way that is different every single time? Or rather, how do you make sure that all of the routines don't hit the same beats at the same moment every single time?
No, that makes sense. Like, again, and perception is always, it varies for everyone, right? So what I think I produce might be different from what other people see. So I'm just going to speak from what I feel, right? But it could be something, it could be perceived differently. But I do think performance sometimes is where I would like, that was my comfortability, right? It's like, I'm okay with the facial expressions, or like, I like the emotional side because it did remind me more of theater. But I did think a lot of times for me, it depended on the song, right? Like I could pull from the song, maybe more of the feelings or emotion or interactions with my dance partner. So it would change. Like I've actually never been, and neither of us have, like, and I think we're starting to do more of this. Like we've never had the choreographed, like all the winks and all the, of course, arm styling, but never like the winks or the nods. I think we're actually getting more into that now. And that's when I say like dynamics. Being a young partnership, I think we just knew we had to get out there as quick as possible, right? And look clean. And what I liked about the process we did with our team and the coaches was, it's like, okay, her and I were completely different styles. Even though she had been competing rhythm for a while and I've been competing rhythm, we were very different. So their first goal with us was just to, let's make you the same, like put you in the same, like, not role, but because obviously we want to be the same role, but just give us common ground together, that we can speak the same language and dance the same language together and be clean. And then we can start adding all those extras and little things that make us on top. And I think that's where we are now, is finding our niche and what makes us like, why would people want to watch Aaron and Xenia, you know? But, and I think those are the moments we're going through now, of finding the dynamic changes of like, okay, even in the smallest step versus over in general. I'm just trying to like process, like, in general, everyone's always like, okay, cha-cha is flirty. Okay, Roomba is romantic. You know, like we all have that time old adage of like, this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
But finding what each individual moment means for us, I feel like is what we're doing now. But trying to keep it more spontaneous, right? That, yes, this is what we want. This is our umbrella, but it can't just be fake, right? People can tell. Any dancer, you might fool someone in the audience maybe, but any dancer or judge can tell if you're doing it because you were told to do it or because you really feel it. And maybe I think you need to have something that you really practice. Like, you know where you look, you know where your arm goes, you know if you're adding that wink, but just as a foundation, right? So then you can mix it up and change it and create your own aspect of it. So, but I do think the theater helps. Like if anything, I think in the beginning it was like, we need to tone that down a little bit, Aaron. Like, you know, let's focus a little bit more on the body and this and that, and less on the the face. But so then I noticed where I kind of retreated from that. And even someone I think about like 8 months ago or so was like, you didn't smile as much today, or you didn't do this. And I realized I actually had kind of turned off some expression because I was so focused on, you know, I want to make sure I'm producing volume in my body or trying to use my footwork properly. Like I wanted to improve the dancer, right, versus the performer. But you also can't get rid of that, right? That's the heart, right?
Yeah.
So now I would say what we've been doing the most lately is adding that on top of it. And that's what I like, is because it's starting to feel like, okay, people are going to watch us, and we won't just be that nice, clean couple. Maybe we'll be this couple that they're like, oh yeah, we know them for that, and we like this, and that's what dance is about, right? Not just being, they had beautiful feet.
Right.
And that's important, but that can't be the only thing. You assume everyone in the final of open, you assume they all have beautiful feet or beautiful lines, and that's not always true, right? But we know them each for something.
Right.
And I think that's maybe hits the point of the theater side, which is very different from my dance partner. Like that wasn't her background, but to be determined, I guess, with the performance. Like I think that's now coming out, and I hope that's what people see when we go back out again, that we have this new aesthetic of not only body but emotion, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, like you said, your new partnership, you just wanted to get out first year and just be seen and just establish this is the new partnership. These are our names. This is what we can do. And now that you're working in year 2 and then year 3, you can start to say, okay, who are we as a professional partnership and what do we want to be known for? The other thing that I wanted to kind of mention was you were talking about kind of balancing the performance and the emotion of it. I think something that I am starting to notice is that there are different volume levels in performances, and the professionals or the dancers at any level that can modulate between, projecting out to the audience and then having a soft moment where it's just between the two people dancing. Those are the couples that I feel compelled to watch, because I feel like they bring me into whatever moment they're dancing, and then again, they can balance it with, but this is also a performance and I want to be projecting to the audience. So I think it's very much like a theater production in some ways, in that you're wanting to project to the back row, but also make it feel like you're the only two people on the stage.
Yes, like that's a perfect way of describing it, right? That's the beauty of it, right? Because it is this partnership. Like in theater, unless you were, the lead or supporting lead and you're singing this love song on the stage, of course, then it's about the audience interacting with you too solely. But there's always that, not always, but typically in theaters, there's that fourth wall, right? Of like, you kind of don't break the fourth wall, like the interaction between you and the audience. Or if you do, it is so planned, right? It's like, let me make this obvious that I'm talking to you, audience. And with ballroom, I think it does that same thing, but the subtleness of when they draw you in, you really feel like it's an intimate moment that you're just watching, that you're getting to see this couple's private like conversation, right? Versus, and those are the moments I love too, right? I love it when someone draws your attention and you like, they lock eyes with you and you can't look away, but then the beautiful moment between them, even if it's cha-cha, it could be something, just a quick glance or smile, but that's what we live for, right? Those are the moments that we really want to see. You don't even start to look at the technique anymore. Even though, of course, the person has technique, but it's like, it's so interesting. Of like, when do you cross that line, right? Of not in a bad way, but of, you need to be a clean dancer that has all of these qualities, right? And it's like, you need to show, and in anything, right? I'm talking about competition, but it's also, we could talk about it for the tour team, right? You need to have all these qualities of like technique or volume or footwork, like showing that I can do all these things. But then when does the performance or the dynamic of that personality, like when is that more important? Like when do we fall in love with that more than the technique? And when are you allowed to do that, right? Like, I think that's the question of, when do you have the right? When have you like earned the right to do it, because sometimes it's like we might want to do it, but it's like I think of amateur, right? I think when you do amateur, typically, well, at least like when I was in Utah, sometimes the focus was more about that, because half of the competitors and people in Utah, we were all on teams and performance companies, and it was like, I'm gonna do the craziest dance step and the craziest trick to get people's attention, versus focusing on, is my body doing the right thing,
Mhm.
But maybe that's the maturity of it. It's like, okay, now I'm gonna go for, I want my body to do the right thing, and then as you feel better later, you can add on all the dynamic performance changes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's yeah. The balance and the flipping of the switch between I want to focus on technique and I want to make sure that I'm moving correctly to I want to engage people and I want it to be a performance. It's that hard line. It's a hard line to kind of figure out where it is and how much of one do you want versus how much of the other. And I think you're right. I think there's a little bit good, bad, or otherwise, there's a little bit of a perception in the industry of you have to earn your ability to be a performer, which is just it's a little weird in my mind, but it is what it is. I wanted to dial back just for a second because you mentioned something in the very beginning that I actually was not aware of, which is you had started out with Arthur Murray in New Jersey. So I feel like, and I don't want you to do like a pro con list. I won't have you go under the bus for that. But I do want, if you're willing to talk about the different experiences that you had, because you're kind of in a unique opportunity to talk about Arthur Murray as a franchise, then going independent in Utah, and now Fred Astaire in California. So I guess, yeah, I'll leave it to you to decide where you want to go with that. But what was the experience like with each? Common threads, differences that you've noticed?
Yeah, I feel lucky because I've done all three. I don't know if that's like a checklist, right? to have, but I've had good experiences in all three, right? Sometimes you hear people say negative things, and that's not what I'm here for, right? That's my job, and but I had like really positive experiences in all three. But when I think about why were they positive, and I think it's because it connected to what stage in life I was in, right? And I think that's what's important for people. Like if you're going to decide what you want to do, I think it really depends on what stage you're in, and I'll elaborate on that. Of like when I started Arthur Murray, again, I was living in Countryland, New Jersey, and the Arthur Murray was the closest studio to me, you know. So that was kind of my first attachment, and then, but it had the structure, right? It was willing to bring you in and like throw its structure at you, and like really kind of, I was 18, and like teach you like this is how you would teach, or this is how you would present something, like it had the formality, and that's not in a negative way. It's like just structure, right? And I think that kind of, because I had that foundation at younger, it helped me become a teacher throughout the rest of my progression, right? And I've had to change teaching of syllabuses or syllabi, but that same foundation was there of, customer service, and I don't know, just the caring about the client, not because of money. It's not about the money, right? But like, how do you help someone further their interest and passion in dance, right, in a uniform way? And I think that's very helpful for people, right? And not that people don't have that in independent. So many people have a really amazing structure in independent as well. Like I know we used Tavita, right, when we were teaching together, and but what I found for myself, which was important, was like, okay, so I was in college and I had the franchise, and that was difficult because typically people that were in the franchise weren't in school that I knew of. They were all like, this was their job. And I was part-time, but this was their full-time job, and I couldn't do that, right? I wanted to finish my bachelor's degree. So it was hard to juggle that, because at the same time, my degree was going to be in art education. It's now in art history, but And many of the times when I'd be at work, they're like, you don't need a degree to do this job. And I was like, I know that, but I want a degree for myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I still feel that way. Like right now I'm working on my master's in museum studies. And but that was difficult. But for me it was always like I'm finishing my degree. Like that was not a question. And that's when I moved to Utah and then worked at Ballroom Utah, right? But then being independent at that stage of my life was perfect because it had the flexibility, right? I that I could manage with school. It's like I could do school full time. I was doing sometimes 21 credits, and I could still work and teach, which I didn't want to lose because I wanted to continue to cultivate that knowledge and experience of teaching. So it was great to have a studio space where my schedule was flexible. Um, I think the flexibility was the biggest thing because I was in school. But then once I graduated, I was kind of like, I was ready to move out of Utah. I think the biggest thing, right? I wanted to get, not that Utah's bad, it's gorgeous, but I love the coast. I grew up near a coast. And and I was turning pro. And I realized that it is sometimes hard being pro in Utah. So many, like some couples have made it happen, but I realized it's easier to get to resources like coaches and stuff like that in other states. And now it's changing. I even feel like since I've moved, now the Utah dynamic is different. Like,
It's mainly because of peak.
okay,
Oscar and Carolina and David and Natalie opened Peak Performance in Utah County, and that studio has made a point of really pushing the amateur competitive scene up a notch, I think, in Utah County. So they're bringing in a lot of coaches from all over the place. So the access to coaching is a little bit easier, but I still think you made the right call moving when you did.
yeah. At the time when I was there, I know it was like you had to bring in coaches,
Yeah.
like or travel, which obviously isn't bad. You can do that, but I'm like, California's right here. It's so close, and why not go access that knowledge when you can? And I've always wanted to. Of course, you compete in California a lot. Every time you come, you're like, well, at least every time I would come, I'd be like, I wouldn't mind living here. And I felt like I wanted to experience that. So that's when I started looking, and I was looking for. I don't necessarily even when I think of moving here, it wasn't even about like the job per se. Like, of course, it is the job. Like, I like where I'm at, and I'm at Fred Astaire, and I like that there's that structure that, and I have there's a future, right? Like I can really, and there was a future I was before. Again, I'm not trying to pass any like judgment calls, but I think for this stage of my life, it's perfect. I was done school. I wasn't going into my profession of art history, and I wanted to still dance. And I was like, okay, but I wanted something full time, and independent. You can be full time, but you kind of have to like build up that clientele or those hours, and that's not a bad thing. But it's like if you want something that's like, no, you're here from this time to this time, then you go for it. It depends on, I think, people's personality, but I think it'd be great if in Utah people like young amateurs were more aware of that, because I do, just to touch on this, like I do think sometimes there's this fear of the unknown, of they just hear like independence this, franchise is this, and I wish there was a little bit more collaboration with that knowledge in Utah. So then people could, venture into the teaching world or professional world or pro-am world and not be completely terrified or not know what to do, because I think both are viable options, independent and franchise. Of course, I'm at a franchise now, so like I love where I'm at, but everyone's different, right? So you need to find what's best for you, because if you have this mentality that you just want to do things absolutely your way and best, you should be independent, right? Because it's like you're not going to be maybe happy where you are, where you have to have more of a team aspect, right? And at Ballroom Utah, I actually felt like we were much like a family and team. So, which maybe isn't. I hear other independent studios are like that too, where they're families. So, but some aren't. It depends on where you are. But like, we did have that nice little family aspect about it. But yeah, I think each is different. But now I'm trying to think, where was I going with that point? And I was like, trail.
Yeah.
But the difference between the both. But I was going to say something about why I came here, right? So I was dancing with Giovanna at the time, and I was still in Utah, and we just came out to do a coaching with Tomas and Isabella, and with Isabella actually, and her and I then were just talking, all of us afterwards, and she was telling us about the studio and telling them about what they do, and I knew I wanted to move to California, and I really wanted to pursue professional. I like to think that I don't do anything halfway. Like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to jump all in. And maybe that's not always good, because I'm like, don't tell me, I'm going to go. That's how I ended up in Utah, right? My family's like, don't go, don't leave New Jersey. And I'm like, no, I'm going to go, I'm going to do it, So it's like, if you're afraid, you got to take a leap, right? If you really want to like get to your ultimate goal. And I knew, I was like, I want to do ballroom seriously. I don't want to just say that I tried and I gave half effort. And I was like, I'm not training the way I should be when I was in Utah, for me, and there are couples that are training, I think, very well. And like you said, now there's this, like, more coaches are coming in, but I was like, I'm not training the way I should be. And I was like, I am not going to get where I want to be. It will take much longer unless if I want this, I need to take the step to go. And then talking to Isabella and them, I was like, I feel really comfortable here. And they were great people. And I was like, they would be a good team. And it's been the truth. Like, it's been proven. Like, they've been a really good direction for my professional dancing, and just as a career and as a person. But between the weighing the scales of independent to franchise, I think every person should just look at, where am I at in my life? What do I want, right? Like, what's the long-term goal? Because so many, we're artists, right? Everyone's an artist. Well, dancers are artists and such, but it's always about, so much is about now, right? It's always like, what do I need right now? And how do I feel right now? Yeah. But we have to think about the future, right? And what do you want in the future? Like, do you want, and I think that will determine what you want to be in, like what route you want to go. Or like, for a college student, like working, like a college student at UVU who's on tour team, who maybe wants to get experience teaching, why not go to one of the independent studios, right? Like, they could start teaching, even if it's just a few lessons a week, and just gaining that experience, and they don't have to be somewhere for a certain amount of hours. So it's like, you got to do what you got to do, right?
Yeah. Something that I kind of was thinking about as you were going through that is the fact that you mentioned that kind of the franchise system gives you a little bit more of a structure. Like, you have to be on site for X number of hours. That is your 9 to 5 workday. And as someone who is starting their professional career, I feel like that gives you, again, that structure of, I have to be in the studio for 40 hours, right? I might not be teaching the full 40 hours, but I'm on site that 40 hours. So I know I'm in the building, so I can work on practice routines that I need to for my professional career. Whereas I feel like, especially the Ballroom Utah atmosphere that we were both in, you set your own schedule. So it was very easy. And I certainly found myself in this situation where, like, all right, well, I'm not teaching until 5 o'clock in the evening, and then I'm teaching a 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm just going to hang out and, doodle on Facebook until I have to leave the house at 4 o'clock. I don't want to drive to the studio if I'm not teaching. So for a while, before I put a structure in place for myself, I was not practicing nearly as often as I probably should have been, because it was so easy for me to find other things to fill that time. Yeah. So if you are at a stage in your life where you need that structure and you need, a construct around in which it forces you to go and put in the work, I think a franchise system 100% makes sense. If you If you're someone, like you said, a student where, you've got classes that you have to work around and you need a little bit more flexibility in your schedule, or you're someone that has a family, or this is a part-time, whatever, having the independence of having the flexibility of being independent, there we go, makes sense for that person. So yeah, something that also struck me, and I'm wondering if you've had this experience either in New Jersey or in California. When I was starting in Pittsburgh, USA Dance, which I know people have some strong feelings on USA Dance at the moment. USA Dance had a chapter in Pittsburgh, and as part of that chapter, they had monthly socials that went to all of the different studios. So one week it was at the Arthur Murray, the next week it was at Art and Style, the next week it was at Absolute, the next week it was at Fred Astaire. So it encouraged people in the community that were taking lessons to go to all of the different studios and meet all of the staff. And I feel like in Pittsburgh there was much less of I'm a franchise student, or, oh, I'm an independent student. It was much more, I'm just a student of dance and I'm going to go to each individual studio that has expertise in the thing that I want to learn at that time. So one studio was much better at international from a competitive perspective. One was much more American, smooth, social perspective. One had a really great Argentine program. Like it was less clicky, I guess to say. When I moved to Utah, and it was because we didn't have any franchises for a long time. Now we do have one that's in the Valley. I feel like everyone was very much like, if I go to this studio, that is the only studio that I will step foot in, and I will immediately be ostracized if I even think about taking a class or a lesson at this other studio with this other instructor. What has your experience been outside of Utah with kind of studio loyalty?
Yeah, I hearing you talk about this Pittsburgh environment, or Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That I'm like, wow, that sounds so different. Like I've never experienced that. Typically I do think where you usually go, it's more that competitive atmosphere of like you're here or you're there. Like there's a little bit more of lines drawn, right? So my experience has definitely been more on the side of, like you said, in Utah, where it was like, if you're a part of this camp, this is your camp, and not that I think all of like the thing is everyone knows each other, right? The community is only so big. And what I love is there's no hostility there, right? Everyone is very supportive of each other, but I do feel like there's a little bit more of ownership of like, okay, well, these people are with me, or these people are not in teachers, but I mean, just like in studio atmosphere. And I don't even know if that's necessarily something that the studios cultivate always, or is it also the clients, because you do get attached to people and it's a family, right? And it's like, I know at Ballroom Utah, where we were like, the people that came, they were very much like, you saw them every week and they were the family that came.
Yeah.
And, but that's interesting to hear that perspective in Pittsburgh. Yeah. Like I haven't run into that before. And in New Jersey, we were kind of the only studio around the area. So there really wasn't another one to connect to. I'm trying to think. The only places you could go out like salsa dancing, but it was more just like a venue. It wasn't a dance studio. So that's a very what I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Did you like that environment in Pittsburgh? Like
I loved it. I thought it was really smart. It takes a lot of buy-in on the part, I believe, of the studios and of the instructors to kind of play that game. And since I left, I've now heard that that's maybe no longer the case. Maybe there's a little bit of studio politics and things are a little bit different. But when I was there, I really liked it because I felt like it gave, kind of going along with that imposter syndrome, like it gave you as an instructor or you as a studio as a whole the ability to really put your foot on the line and say, like, we want to be known as the studio that does this one thing really well. And we don't have to pretend like we can do everything evenly. Yes, the studio that I was at was an independent studio. And I feel like they were really known for high quality American dancing. So American Smooth and American Rhythm. Art and Style, which was owned, I believe it's still owned by Rosanna and Terry Sweeney. They were known as the international studio. Like if you wanted to learn standard and Latin, and especially if you wanted to compete, that's where you went. The Arthur Murray and the Fred Astaire were social. Like if you were a beginner and you were looking to just figure out what it was to be in this ballroom world, you started out as a franchise more often than not. And I think it allowed each studio to kind of take a focus and really create a persona that said, if you're interested in this, come to us. If you're not interested in this, here are your other options. And we're okay with that because eventually you're going to come to us. And we kind of know that.
That sounds like they were just very aware of like their strengths, right? Which was smart, I think, for that group. Like I'm trying to like think of it in terms of like where I am now and being at Fred Astaire Redondo. I think it's like I think we don't have that as much in the area because it's like, okay, we do, like you mentioned, the social aspect of like when you said like Arthur or Fred's, and I think sometimes that was the perception of the social. But then like coming to Fred Astaire Redondo, like we have the social dancers, but we have actually like really, really like great competitive students too. Like, and many, many competitive, like it's just cool to see that like in any area around the country or whatever, like everything varies, right? So, because we're definitely a very like focused on competition and social, and I think that's partially because also like the people who are there, right? We have a lot of competitive teachers that are doing, I think, well, and then the owners were great competitors, but we're able to like kind of nicely, what's the word? I think accommodate for anyone, like depending on like if you want social or if you want competitive. But I've never heard of that like environment, at least in my experience throughout the years. Like I haven't had that experience, of people like saying, oh, I go here for this or here for this.
Well, I think at least in my opinion, Ballroom Utah was kind of like a microcosm of that. So where in Pittsburgh, we had different studios that had different strengths. I feel like our team at Ballroom Utah for the couple years that we were all there at the same time, we had different strengths, right? If you wanted American Smooth, you probably were a student of David. If you wanted American Rhythm, you were probably, your student. If you were a wedding student, you came to me. If you were international Latin, you went to Christian. Like we all kind of had our niches, and it wasn't to say that we didn't all teach everything. It was just we all had a reputation for like, if you want this thing, you're probably going to focus most of your time with this instructor. And at least I didn't feel like any of us were precious about our students at the time. I felt like it was very much we wanted the best for our clients. And if that meant spending a week or two with a different instructor, that was okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like there was never that like ownership. And I think that's dangerous to think that I'm like, these are people, right? Like you have to do what's best for them and what's best for like their learning. And if they're going to learn something really well from someone, I think that's ultimately the goal, And I guess this is going to sound like a plug for the studio I'm at, but like that, I'm just talking about my experience, like about being at the Fred Astaire, like, and having this buddy system, like it kind of produces that same thing. It's like, you can go to anyone, like all of us are, like you said, even where we were, like all of us are capable of teaching you anything. But if you feel like you want to learn this from this person or this, like, go for it, right? Like you've got to, it's like in any education system, you don't learn from one person, right? Like it's like if you go to university, you don't have one teacher your entire time. You learn from different teachers, and it doesn't mean that you don't have someone that is like that grounds you, right? That like keeps you like, yes, I know your whole history of dance, and I'm going to, even like a coach, like Tomas and Issa are my coach, and they like know my history, my capability, but they know they also bring in people to add to that experience. And I think as a teacher, you have to do that too, right? Like, yes, you know them, you know maybe how to guide them the best, but they can definitely benefit from someone else's knowledge, whether it's in the studio or, you know what I mean? So I think it's better to have that atmosphere versus like don't touch or don't that can cause a lot of anxiety that I don't think is necessary.
Oh, definitely. And yeah, I think the motivation for someone that's like, no, you are my student, you're not allowed, like earmuffs, you're not allowed to take any other lessons from any other instructors. I think you're right. I think it's fear, it's anxiety. It's also just like a sense of, I don't want to be proven wrong. Like, I don't want you to go to a different instructor and get a different piece of information and then come back to me and be like, well, you taught me this incorrectly. I think there's a little bit of ego, or again, going back to imposter syndrome, where we're like, if I'm the only voice that you hear, then I'm 100% absolutely correct.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And that's a dangerous place to be, because it's like we would be then ignoring our entire experience, even as a professional, to think like, I've learned everything from one person and that is it. And I've kept my ears deaf to anyone else. It's like, no, we know it takes a community, right? To literally train people, it takes a community. And it's like, that's the same thing in our in each studio. It should be that, right? Like, it's like, this is your community to learn from, not you come here for this one individual person. Like, no, it's great to have that source of like of kind of like guidance, right? Like, I can go to you and you're going to tell me as my main teacher, like, please, like, tell me what's the best way for me to get here, right? And it's like, but then it takes the involvement of others.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Well, and
Yeah,
how many times, to kind of go back to the independent franchise discussion about, it depends on where you are in life. I mean, I know in my own experience, and I'm sure that you've had this experience as well, I've gotten a piece of information from a coach when I was at a certain point, and then I moved on to a different stage in my own understanding as a student and got a conflicting piece of information. So in the moment, I was like, oh, well, that instructor didn't know what they were talking about. I'm going to go ahead and switch my mindset and do this. And then later on down the road, you're at a different stage in your career and you're like, oh, wait, no, that works so much better for my body and what I'm trying to do now than this middle piece of information ever was going to, now that I'm here. You know, for me, with my Latin rumba walks, the first instruction that I had was very soft. Like, I just want you to get onto your leg and then roll through the hip. It was very, very flow. Like, don't worry about hitting any extreme lines. Just get on the foot and move through it. And then I had a coach that was all about the extreme shape. And now that I'm 30 and starting to feel a little bit of the aches and pains in my body that I'm only certain will get worse over time, I'm definitely going back to that. Nope, just get on the foot, make it easy on your joints, like, move through it. So I think different coaches at different stages in your career are also going to move you in a direction.
And I think it's, to add to that, it's like, where are you mentally? Like, are you ready to hear what you've been given? Because I know throughout I guess I've been teaching for nine years. Like, if I started when I was 18, so I'm 27. So it's like, everyone else do the math. But it was, I'm sure throughout this entire time, people have been, giving me, even if we talk about business, like how to run a proper studio, or how, like, this knowledge, right? And was I listening, or was I ready for that information to, like, accept it and then use it? And it's like, depending on, and I don't even think that was determined by, oh, where am I at? Am I at a franchise? Am I an independent? It wasn't even about that. It was like, where was I as an individual, like maturing, right? Because like now I would say, like, I want to hear so much about, like, I want a future in the dance business, and I want to own a Fred Astaire, and I want to, I want to have this future. So like, luckily I love where I'm at, that they do a lot of business training. Isabella will do a lot of business training with us, and how to be a good, studio owner one day. And it's like, I'm sure people have told me some of this information before, and she's saying it in a different way, which is great, but it's like, I'm so much more receptive to it now, and want to absorb it. So it's like, okay, now I'm in the place where I deserve, like, I need to be, because I want to absorb that information, where maybe where I was prior was probably trying to give me some information as well. But maybe I just wasn't, maybe our minds aren't ready for something, right? And like you said, like, then you came back to it and you're like, oh, I remember this, right? About the rumble walks.
Yeah.
You're like, I remember someone saying that. Yeah. But it's like, where you are, like, I can only think it all determines of, instead of putting like a stamp on it of this is good or this is bad or this is, like, it's literally just where are you as an individual? Like, are you ready to hear this information or not hear this information? Because you might hear it and then you're not going to use it because you don't want to internalize it, versus like, if you're at that point, then you're like, yes, give it to me,
Yeah.
So I think it just depends, right? Like you said, just where you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Where you are, and often who's giving the information. Your regular coach or your regular instructor can give you the same piece of information that a master level coach gives, but depending on where you are mentally, where you are emotionally, what your mindset is, you may pay attention to it a lot more when it comes from that master level workshop than when it's your regular instructor.
Even though you've heard your instructor say, like, turn your foot, or like, turn your foot out, and someone else says it and they're like, I've never heard that. Yeah, but that's all of us, right? It's like, it just takes that change to make it apparent, or yeah. I agree. I agree with that.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap up today, anything else that you want to talk about, that you want to share, any tips or tricks that you want to make sure that our listeners are aware of?
I'm still learning. So tips and tricks to be determined, right? It's like, I'm in that process waiting for the outcome, but I think we're always there. But there is something that I came upon, like, in these past few months. My degree was in art history and art, and I'm a painter, and I've done art for a long time, but I stopped doing it, right? And but I came back to painting, and I've been reading a lot about it, and like, I found these 3 questions. Like, someone was talking to this artist, and they asked them these 3 questions about their art, and maybe it will mean nothing to some people, but for me, it has like helped guide my process in not only painting, but even I think about it with dance, like. And I think it can relate to many of the topics we've talked about today, of like dynamics or performance or stages of life. But it's these 3 things, and I'll like say the questions, but it's so it's like, when you look at your art, so let's say you look at your art or your dance, and it's like, did you create this to show off your skills? So that's the first question. Did you create this to relate to others? Or did you create this to reveal something about yourself? And yeah, so the question is, did you create this to show off your skills? Did you create this to relate to others? Or did you create this to reveal something about yourself? And I think they all kind of relate, right? But I think if you really decide your purpose for doing something, it can reach one of those questions. Like, is this painting about revealing something about myself, maybe emotionally? Or is this dance step and move, if this is this pattern I'm doing with my professional partner to reveal something about ourselves, maybe that people don't think of? Or is this just to show off, look what I can do, like, which is part of the industry. And I think it's important. Like, it's dance, it's meant to be it's a performance. You're meant to draw attention, right? Especially in a competition, in a positive way. But then, or is this for someone else? Is this purely like, this is for you to see, And I think for me, trying to answer those questions will help guide not only my art, but my dance in a way of, why am I really doing something versus just going out there and I do my cha-cha because I have to cha-cha. That's a little robotic, but is this piece for me to let something out, or is this piece for them? Or is it just to show off, And I think each of them has a viable part in our creation of art or dance or choosing what stage of life you're going to be in, right? So, but that I just recently came upon that, and like I'm obsessed. Like, like I want to use these questions often, and I'm sure there's other ways people have processed. Like everyone has their own, but for me, this is worked the most when I think of these three. So if that's not necessarily a tip, but just a thought.
Yeah, I love that. Because I think depending on the context, you could have just one answer, you could have two, you could have all three. Thinking of like putting together choreography, like you could have your performance be aimed at being a cathartic experience for you, where you're trying to reveal something about yourself, but make sure that a certain move or a certain pattern is there because you can hit it every single time and it looks awesome. So that's showing off your skill and your share, and maybe you want it to also be thought-provoking or meaningful to the audience. Yeah, I like that. I like those.
It kind of determines, is something more internal or external, right? And of course, dance is an external experience, and so is art. Like you see the final product, but like you said earlier, you can feel if you're watching a moment that's more like this is for the two of us, but you're getting to see it, And I think having all three of those things probably makes the best combination overall, like within one piece. But it's deciding where to show it. But I don't know, still contemplating these questions for myself. But I think there's a lot of truth in them,
Yeah, so. Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you, Aaron, so much for being a guest on today's podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I had fun talking to you and seeing you. It's been a while.
It's been a very long time, and I feel like with 2020, it's only been longer. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, we will have to catch up again soon, either on podcast or just like in real life.
I like this plan. Sounds good.
Thank you to Aaron Pierce for being a guest on today's episode. If you'd like to support him or follow his dance journey, you can do so using the links in the description box below. I've been your host, Samantha, with Love.Live.Dance. As always, you can find this and all of our podcast versions of these episodes at ballroomchat.com, or you can find us across social media at Ballroom Chat on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you have not already done so, please do make sure that you give us a thumbs up if you like the video, and make sure that you are subscribed to this YouTube channel. You can also support the podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/ballroomchat, where you get behind the scenes information for every single episode. As always, stay safe, stay positive, and we hope to see you dancing.